Thawabify recently uploaded a video called 12 Common Myths About Islam. But many of the things he calls myths aren't myths at all. In this video, I'll go through each of his claims one by one and explain why I believe he is wrong. Myth number 1, Islam promotes violence. The argument he makes is that Islam forbids aggression and allows violence only in self-defense. Even if the assertion that Islam forbids aggression is true, that does not disprove the claim that Islam promotes violence, because violence is not limited to military invasions. For example, the Quran explicitly mentions that wife-beating is permissible. And across all four schools of Islamic thought, scholars agree that adultery, apostasy, and in some cases blasphemy, are punishable by death. This isn't merely theoretical, it is the written law in countries like Afghanistan, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Yemen. The death penalty is undeniably a form of violence, and in Islam's case, one can be put to death simply for leaving one's religion. Changing one's belief is considered a crime deserving execution. Thawabify is probably aware of this but deliberately chooses not to mention it in his video. Myth number 2, Muslims worship a different God. That's a theological question more than a human rights one, so I don't have anything to add here. Myth number 3, Muslim women are oppressed. He argues that since women gained the right to own property, among other things, Muslim women are not oppressed. This is blatantly false. Women in Islam do have some rights, but by modern standards, those rights are inadequate. Most scholars believe, among other things, that women aren't allowed to be imams and that they should receive half as much in inheritance as their brothers when their father dies. The hijab is often regarded as fard, meaning it is compulsory, implying that a woman who does not adhere to the prescribed standards of hijab is viewed as sinful. And some interpretations go even further and say that covering the face is also obligatory. In countries like Afghanistan, Yemen, and Saudi Arabia, women face intense pressure to wear the full niqab in public. Depending on the exact region in these countries, the prevalence of the niqab ranges from very common to near universal. Women who refuse to comply often risk their reputation, safety, and even life, depending on where they live and how tolerant their family is. These restrictions on women are widely known and well documented, but the video doesn't mention these issues at all. Myth number 4, Jihad means holy war. It is true that jihad doesn't only mean holy war. There are many different kinds of jihad, such as jihad al-nafs and jihad al-shaitan. But there is also military jihad. According to Islam Q&A, military jihad against disbelievers is mandatory in 4 cases. First, when a Muslim is present in a jihad situation. Second, when the enemy attacks Muslim lands. Third, when the ruler mobilizes people. And fourth, when a specific person is needed and no one else can do the job. This type of jihad is further clarified at the end of the page. The third situation is when the leader tells the people to mobilize. The leader, imam, is the highest authority in the state, but he need not necessarily be the leader of all the Muslims, because there has been no leader of all the Muslims, Khalifa, for a long time. What this essentially means is that it is mandatory for Muslims to fight against the disbelievers if Muslim ruler says so. Myth number 5, Muslims hate non-Muslims. Hate is an individual, personal emotion. It is undeniably true that Muslims are not a monolith, and I will never make a generalization like this without any context. However, it is also true that in some cases, a huge number of Muslims do in fact hate certain non-Muslim people. For example, following the terrorist attack on October 7 against Israel, in which approximately 1,200 people were killed, opinion polls indicated that a significant number of individuals in many Muslim communities expressed approval of the attack. Some even celebrated. Even Mehdi Hassan recognizes that anti-Semitism is a huge problem in the British Muslim community. So, Thawabify isn't completely wrong here. I agree that a generalization like this without context is problematic, but I also think it's problematic to ignore the fact that hatred of Jewish people is a major problem in most Muslim communities. Myth number 6, Muslims don't believe in Jesus. Thawabify is correct here. It is a myth. I have nothing to comment on. Myth number 7, Islam spread by the sword. The idea that Islam spread by trade and dialogue is an oversimplification. It is a historical fact that early Islamic caliphates, such as the Rashidun and Umayyad caliphates, engaged in expansionist warfare. The issue of forced conversion is more nuanced, however. I am not a historical expert on this subject, but from my understanding, the spread of Islam involved both coercive and non-coercive methods. Polytheists were often forced to convert. Christians and Jews, on the other hand, could usually keep their religion if they paid a special tax called the jizya. The jizya, along with several other policies, created significant pressure to convert to Islam. Polytheists, in particular, were outright persecuted. Since the caliphates pursued expansionism, many individuals were either forced or strongly pressured to convert to Islam. Therefore, it is inaccurate to dismiss the claim that Islam spread by the sword as merely a myth. Myth number 8, all Muslims are Arabs. He is completely right. It is a myth that Muslims are Arabs. I have nothing to add here. Myth number 9, Sharia law is barbaric. This is one of the most egregious points he makes. He claims that Sharia isn't just a punishment. True, Sharia isn't only about punishment, but punishments are undeniably part of it. Just to name a few examples, married adulterers are to be stoned to death, apostates, meaning people who leave the religion of Islam, are to be executed, and insulting God or the Prophet is punishable by death. It is true that Sharia also covers everyday matters like prayer times, fasting, and honoring parents, but these areas are not unique to Islam. Nearly every culture values kindness and respect for family. What sets Islam apart today is that it's the only major religion that still prescribes the death penalty for leaving the faith or for certain kinds of speech. Those harsh punishments far overshadow the more benign aspects of Sharia. Myth number 10, Islam is against modernity. Thawabify says that Islam is not against modernity due to inventions like algebra. However, this isn't what people who accuse Islam of rejecting modernity usually mean. If by modernity we mean liberal democratic values, women's rights, and tolerance for minorities, it is undeniable that both mainstream Islam and Muslim communities reject it. Homosexuality is punishable by death in Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Iran, and Afghanistan. In 1990, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation introduced the Cairo Declaration on Human Rights as an alternative to the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Article 22a says, "Everyone shall have the right to express his opinion freely in such manner as would not be contrary to the principles of the Sharia," which essentially means that freedom of speech is not guaranteed, since this implies that blasphemy is impermissible. It is true that Islam and Muslims generally don't oppose new technology, but modernity is more than just inventions, it is also liberal democratic values and equality. Myth number 11, Muslims can't be friends with non-Muslims. I don't have much to add to this. Some Islamic scholars assert that Muslims should avoid interacting with disbelievers because they are a negative influence, while others take a more permissive view. There seem to be differing opinions among Islamic scholars regarding this. However, there exist those who claim that befriending disbelievers is haram. Myth number 12, Islam teaches men to control women. It is true that some hadiths in the Sunnah report the Prophet saying that men should treat their wives with respect. But there are also verses in the Quran that endorse wife beating. Surah Al-Nisa verse 34 says, "And if you fear ill conduct from your women, advise them, forsake them in bed, and strike them." This verse explicitly allows men to strike their wives if they fear disobedience. While some modern interpretations try to soften this, the traditional understanding permits it, and it has real-world consequences in countries that enforce strict interpretations of Sharia law. So those were the 12 myths from Thawabify's video. As we have seen, many of the points he calls myths are actually grounded in real practices and historical facts. Oversimplifying complex issues like this does a disservice to anyone trying to understand Islam. If you liked this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. See you next time.